way back, it wasn't sugar. In fact, the Chinese didn't start grinding sugar until about, well, it was, I think, 200 AD. No, I'm sorry, before that, about 200 BC, and they didn't get it to the Mediterranean area until about 600 AD. So anyway, I think they think it's the first alcoholic drink that man used to have, and mainly because they didn't have sugar. So they used that. There's all kinds of mead apparently. There's easy mead, which I call easy mead. It's just basically a few steps and you can make it. And then there's dry sack, sparkling mead, fruit mead, Malamutes, which is a conglomerate of different seasonings. I like the easy mead, and I use just basic equipment, gallon jugs, pot, my wife's stainless steel pot for boiling water. And I like stainless steel because it doesn't give you any aluminum residue. For fermentation lots, there's one here, there's another one here for the gallon jug. Food grade hose for siphoning, that's kind of important. I use a 1/4 inch, about 5 foot long. And a spray bottle, mainly the spray bottle is for spraying your equipment. In other words, I use a Compton tablet to sterilize your paddles or your inside of your bucket or even inside your jar. It's very important, everything I've read is keeping everything very sterile. You can contaminate it and lose the whole batch, so you got to make sure everything is clean. Saying that, don't put dish soap in it and start washing around that, because you'll end up with a lot of suds in your drink. You just can't get rid of it. It's like a sponge you keep trying to get the soap out of there, but you'll end up with stuff in your meat.
What's the product you put in the spray?
Compton tablets. They're a potassium metasulfite. It'll clean and cure the inside of the bottle, so it's neutral and it's not contaminated. Or whatever you spray on.
Grocery store or internet? Where do you get it?
I get mine at a wine store.
Okay.
I make wine, it's potassium metabisulfite.
It's pretty common.
You can either buy it in tablets or you can buy it as a powder.
Right.
Make as much as you need, but it gives off sulfur gas, and that's what keeps the bugs under control.
Okay.
And then, well, you're going to talk a little bit more about yeast later.
Right.
Yeah, I just use bleach. So I take a big bottle of Clorox. If I'm cleaning out this carboy, I just put a couple drops in, and I fill it up usually to the top, let it sit, and then that's how I sanitize my stuff. So just household bleach.
So there's always getting around it, but the very important thing is making sure everything is sterile. The supplies I use are 3 to 4 pounds of honey. Now, to make a gallon of mead using 4 pounds of honey, I think, it's kind of cost effective, because it's, even at our prices of $20 for 3 pounds or 4 pounds, it's pretty expensive for a gallon of mead. But anyway, you have to do it for the fun of it. I use wine yeast. You can buy that again at the wine store. This is a pack, and it's good for about 6 gallons. So if you're making a gallon, you have to portion it out. There's other yeast you can use. They don't seem to recommend bread yeast. It doesn't seem to react the same way as it does with the sugar. 2 Camden tablets mainly for, I make a gallon jug of it up to use as a spray and also as a wash. You use one tablet per gallon just for a sterile solution. I use 3 large lemons or equivalent, and honey has a perfect pH, but it doesn't have any acidic values. You have to add the acid to it, so you can do that with yeast nutrient or something like that. Or we use lemons. I think you use lemons too.
Lemons, yeah.
Yeah, the lemon will do the same thing.
Does that affect the flavor?
I don't know that. I've only made it once, and I can't really compare it to anybody else's.
Yeah,
I don't really know. Does it?
No.
I don't think so. It's-
If you're concerned, you can also, if you go to a wine store, you can buy acid blend,
Right.
which is citric acid, tartaric acid, and one other acid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can add that instead.
But, you know, I don't know, I can't really compare to tell you because I only made one batch. Not a very good thing. And I use good well water, right? You don't want to use chlorine type water. You know, if you're in a city, there's water available. It usually has chlorine. You don't want to use that, or I don't think you should use it unless I think you can boil it off, I'm not sure.
You know, there's the research I've been doing on this, right? There's you don't want to boil. There's arguments, right, against boiling the mead or boiling, I'm sorry, the honey in the water. Or I talked to the guy last night at the brew place, and he said just to make sure you get rid of anything, you would heat it up to a boil.
The water
The
alone.
water and the honey. And the honey, just heat it up to a boil and then stop.
Right.
And that'll kill anything that's in there. And or you can boil it for 15 minutes. But the problem with boiling is it takes stuff out of the honey, right?
So, too, you can, you can burn the honey.
If you have to stir it, right?
Yeah, so you really don't want to do that. You want to bring it up to a boil and shut it down. At least that's what I've done.
Yeah.
Of course, again, I put the water in a pot, bring it to a boil, and then add the honey, make sure it doesn't burn. The honey doesn't burn in the water. And then again, I use juice from a lemon, or you can add your nutrient at that time. Then you cover the liquid and let it cool back to room temperature. At that point, dissolve your yeast in room temperature water. You don't want to get your yeast too warm, it'll kill it right away. So you want to be able to get it room temperature, but you want to get it to dissolve. And then you add it to your liquid, stir gently, put it in your jug, and place it in an area, 68, 70 degrees, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it should in a couple days start bubbling. And you'll see it bubble out through the stopper. This is in a gallon jug again, or in a pot barrel, depends how you make it. You put water in this thing, and what it does is the CO2 that gives off from your yeast and sugar reaction, your carbon monoxide from your reaction, pushes your bubble up, lets the gas out, but it won't let anything back in. So that's important. What else we have here? Talked about sanitation. Sometimes when you heat this stuff up, there's a little scum that goes on top, comes up to the top. Just clean that off and throw that away. You may end up with a little more liquid because you're adding the sugar or the honey to the water. Save the extra, because what you want to do is top up your jug. In other words, it's pretty important that you fill it up pretty much near the top. You don't want a lot of air, or the CO2 gas that gets off of here. You don't want a lot of air to get above it to spoil it.
How would you keep that extra liquid in the refrigerator?
I put it in a quart jar.
Just let it sit out?
You can refrigerate it just to stabilize it. When it stops burping, or what I call burping, actually bubbling out through there, it's usually ready to be what we call decanted or racked. And what that means is you're going to drain off either with a siphon or some way, get the clearer liquid that's in the top part of the bottle. You'll have a little sediment you'll see in the bottom. You don't want to try to pass that on to the next container. So what you want to do is rack that and then put it back, stop it back and leave it sit. Usually it takes probably at least 6 weeks or more to get to the point where it starts to clear and it becomes something that you maybe don't want to drink. The longer you keep it, I'll tell you
Yeah.
the better it is.
It's like wine.
I think that's pretty much it.
That's the quick rundown, right?
Yeah.
So has anybody, I know Bob makes wine.
Can I put my 2 cents in about boiling it?
Yes.
So, my take on it would be, this again, based on, I've never made mead, but I've made bottled wine, grape wines and fruit wines, all kinds of wines. If you're not gonna use any kind of Camden solution, if you're not gonna use any kind of sulfite, right, then I would suggest you need to do something to kill the wild yeast that's in there. But if you're gonna be using the sulfite solution, you really don't need to boil it, because what you're doing is you're putting that sulfite solution in there, and what it does is it suppresses the wild yeast. It basically kills the wild yeast. And then when you make your yeast starter, all of those wine yeasts are sulfite resistant. So you've got a lot of them going, and when you put it in, it just takes over so fast that it can't spoil. So my 2 cents would be, if you're gonna use the sulfite solution or the Camden tablets, I don't really see any reason to boil it. And, I would, if I was gonna make it, I wouldn't boil my honey if I didn't need to. If I wasn't gonna use sulfite, then I would do something to try to kill that wild yeast.
One of the reasons that you heat it, or you don't have to boil it, is to get the honey to distribute through the water.
Water.
And mainly, it'll turn to a liquid, and it, becomes part of the solution that you're trying to work with. So you really don't have to boil it. In fact, the books kind of say you want to be very careful to boil it, because you can burn honey. You don't want to do that.
Because we do the same thing in wine making. Wine doesn't really need to be sterile, neither does mead, but it needs to be pretty clean.
Right.
So what you do is you put the sulfite in after you crush the grapes, and that kills all the wild yeast. Then you put your yeast starter, and it just takes over. And then you're up to your arms in it for the next 2 weeks, and it's fine, right? So what you want to do is to make sure that the proper wine yeast takes over and is the one that's converting the sugars into alcohol.
Have a little foot action in the grape juice. So that's all I had. I don't know if you have any questions that I might be able to help you with. Like I said, I've only made it for a year, and this is what's left of, I think, outputs.
So I have a question. That seems like a lot of honey. Is that pretty typical?
Every recipe,
recipes.
I had 3 to 4, and the more
3 to 4 for 1 gallon.
Yeah, the more you
Wow.
add, the sweeter it is. I think I did 3, but I took that to the Warren County Fair, and Bob looked around. Tim looked at it and said, "I don't like it. It's not dark enough." That's honey I had. It had the light honey the year before.
Yeah, what'll happen, the more, it's just like when you make beer, right? And I brought an example here because I'm a home brewer. So basically, this is malt, right? And the malt is the sugar. So the yeast will eat the sugar, and that's what makes your alcohol. So basically, what's my track there?
Actually, just a
Color,
side note.
dark color you were talking about.
Thank you. So the more malt you put in, this is 6 pounds of malt. So when I put 6 pounds of malt and I put it into a 5-gallon bucket, you come up with about 4.5% alcohol. So the more, so if I put, say I put 9 pounds into the 5 gallons, then that's going to bring up the alcohol content. And the more sugars you put in, the more food there is for the yeast to eat. Now beer, I think, tops off around, there's certain yeast that at a certain alcohol content, they die. So like, I think it's 8% maybe, something like that. Whereas your mead, you'll go to 10 to 12%, more like a wine, I think.
Yeah.
And like Bob was saying, if you put, the more honey you put in, the higher the alcohol content, but maybe eventually the yeast will die off, not eat all the sugar, so it makes it sweeter.
Yeah, for every unit of sugar you put in, 1 unit, no, there's 2 units. 1 unit would be carbon dioxide, and 1 unit, it turns to alcohol. So every unit of sugar you put in, it breaks it down into 2. 1 would be alcohol, and the other would be carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is what comes off the top, what you're trying to burp out of the bottle.
So just to follow up, so that's why it's important, depending on what kind of mead you want to make. If you want to make a dry mead, you've got to buy a yeast that's very alcohol tolerant. Okay, and again, you can talk to people in the wine shops and they'll direct you to which ones they are. If you want to make a sweet one, then you could buy a different kind of yeast that gets up to a certain level, say 6 or 7% alcohol, and then the alcohol kills the yeast. So it leaves some residual sugar in there, which is what makes it sweet.
Right. And you guys can, when you're talking about the yeast here, I had used before, this is a wine yeast, and I actually used this wine yeast, it's a dry one, to do cider. But, so that's a dry yeast. But I also brought containers of, this is what they call live yeast. Seen this before? Yeah? No? So it's a,
I've heard of it, but.
yeah, so this is live yeast, and Bob was saying for sweet mead, so this is a sweet mead wine yeast. So it's supposed to make it, when it ferments, sweet, right? And you want to keep this cold because it's alive right now. So I got that in here. But you just basically, as Bob was saying, you heat up the wort, and actually when you, wort is in the beer terminology, but when you heat up the honey and the water and all of that, it's called must, exactly. And while making beer, making mead, this is a wort chiller or must chiller if you want to do it, but you want to quickly bring your wort or your must down from boiling down to 70, almost 80 degrees, because that's the temperature you want to pitch your yeast. If you pitch it at a higher, it'll kill the yeast. So this is what they call a wort chiller. And I put this in the bucket, and I run cold water through here, and it just brings the temperature down. Runs it through into the hot wort and cools it down, probably 20 minutes, something like that. And then after that, I add the cold water and then pitch in the yeast.
That device is also used in winemaking.
This one?
The chiller, but it's typically, you probably wouldn't need it for mead, because during fermentation, in addition to converting the sugar to alcohol and carbon dioxide, it generates a lot of heat. So I make mine in a 55-gallon drum, and it actually gets to be about 85 to 90 degrees, and you don't want it that hot. You want to keep it down. You want it to ferment at a cooler temperature, around room temperature, maybe 70, 75. So if you find that your must is getting too hot just from the fermentation, depending on how much you're making, you have to make a pretty good batch. You might want to cool it down using one of those, so I've done that as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get some off flavors from that, from it just
When it
being
gets
too hot.
Another technique is to take a wet towel or a shirt and you soak that, and then you put it on top of here to cool it off.
Good tip.
So can you go through what you have on the table? Each
Yeah, I mean, if you guys.
bottles and the,
If you guys search the internet, you can find lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of information out there. I mean, the other night I spent, I don't know how many hours looking up information on there, but if you ever want a good book, this is called The Joy of Home Brewing. Charlie Papasan, they call him I forget what the name is, but he wrote this book and he brought home brewing, to all the people around here. Because way back when he wrote this, you really couldn't get the good flavored beers that you can get nowadays. They just didn't make them. You had your Budweiser, and you had your, PBRs, and whatever you want to call them, right? But this guy came out with this book, and he has a really good section on here on mead. So if you want to read about that, you can look through there. So, going through what we have here, this is the wort chiller that I explained about before. This is what you call your fermentation bucket. Usually it has 5 gallons. On the side here, you will put in all your ingredients, fill that bucket up to the 5-gallon mark up here. Again, this is your primary fermenter. And this is what's called the lock. And this allows, what Bob was talking about, allows the gases to escape. Comes out, you fill this up with water, and it allows the gases to come out and not to let any stuff go inside here and possibly contaminate this. Usually, you'll start your batch in here, pitch the yeast, and ferment this for maybe a week, something like that. And then after the sediment goes to the bottom, Bob said you would rack it out and you bring it into a secondary fermenter. That's this here. And I think the reason it's glass is so you can watch what's going on. You can see the clarity that comes through here. You can see the bubbles. There'll be bubbles that come up, and as it stops fermenting, the bubbles won't be coming up anymore. And as this gets clearer, then you're going to want to go ahead and bottle it.
You know, what's nice about that too, is you see the sediment in the bottom. You know, as it's being racked out, and as it clears, you can see it. You may want to rack it again if, you know, if there's a lot in there,
Right,
because it helps clarify. At least that's what I found.
exactly. Yeah, you can see all the stuff on the bottom.
Right.
And the tube, I didn't bring the tube, but when you rack it, the tube comes down and there's actually a thing on the bottom that allows it to sit up a little bit. So, do you do that for wine?
Yes, so exactly what you're saying. So if you leave it long enough, it'll clear. Most wines will clear and most mead will clear. But if it doesn't for some reason, because sometimes it gets stuck, there's a couple things you can do. One is you can put pectic enzyme in the beginning. And what pectic enzyme does is it degrades pectin, which is what makes jelly.
Mhm.
Okay, and that keeps a lot of stuff, sometimes keeps a haze in your wine or in your mead. So if you put that in the beginning, it doesn't add any flavor or anything, you don't need a lot of it, but it just prevents that haze, that stubborn haze from not clearing. Or if you get one that you've waited a few months and it hasn't cleared, you can use what's called a fining agent. So they use bentonite, which is a clay compound. They use sometimes egg yolks, and I've also used something called sparkaloid, which I just read works really well on mead.
I've used sparkle, not
Yeah.
on me, but I've used that, it's really nice.
What I find with wine, if you use those fining agents, you lose some body and some flavor, so I don't know if it's the same with mead, but I suspect it would be. So, you know, the rule of thumb would be, just be patient. If you wait long enough, it will clear, you know, under most circumstances.
The other thing, I mean, this isn't for, I don't know if you can use this in mead or not, but this is Irish moss. That does the same thing too,
Yes.
where it cleans it. I think it's a negative reaction or something, cleans it, makes it clearer.
Actually, I meant to mention that. There is a Yahoo group for mead makers, if you haven't seen it. So I was out there today just looking around, getting lots of recipes, lots of advice back and forth. So if you're really into it and you have a question, you can just post a question to the Yahoo group and they'll help you out.
Do you store that bottle somewhere in the dark?
I have it in the basement. I usually put a shirt on it. Yeah, you don't want to have the sunlight coming into it because it could contaminate it. So it's in my basement. I have a window on the side here, and usually put a shirt around it. So bottling. Let's see. I just put another lock in here. There's different little fittings for these. I want to show you this carboy. If you wanted to do a small mead, I think this is 2.5 gallons. So if you want to do a small batch of something, you want to try something crazy like pepper mead or something like that. Chipotle mead, maybe.
It's unlimited, the stuff you can add to the
Yeah, there's
Things
all,
to mead.
exactly.
fruit, whatever.
So when you're bottling, usually when I bottle, I have a hook in my basement, and I hang this up on the hook. And I actually have a different, it's called a bottling bucket, and it's got a little spigot on the side here. So I hang this up high enough, and then I run this hose from the spigot, and this is called your, this goes into your bottle. So what you do is, your bottle here, and before I start the bottling, you want to add, there'll still be some live yeast in here. And you want to add, I think, a little bit of sugar to the mead to have it carbonate again. Do you use sugar?
No, I put stuff in to stop it from carbonating, because I've had it,
Okay, so it
but
doesn't.
I've opened it up and it's been like sparkling.
Okay, so it doesn't have to worry about it. When you make beer, though, in order to carbonate in the bottles, you just
Oh,
put
yeah.
priming sugar in there.
Yeah, I don't.
You can also put the brown sugar in the bottle, too.
You could, yeah. You could put, I forget how much it is in
You
each
just
bottle.
can't put too much.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's easier to, yeah, because
Yeah, lower
Yeah.
top right.
that's why now we usually put it in
Mix
here.
it all.
Yeah. Remember, I don't bottle a lot now, I keg now, so I don't have to worry about that. So you come down and the liquid will come through here, and you just basically, you push down on this, and it fills it all the way up to the top. And when you remove it, it gives it a little bit of a gap, and that allows it to, still ferment. Now bottles you can use, these Grolsch ones are nice, if you can get them. They have a stopper right on top, so you fill it up, put this down, And then you just basically let that sit for as long as it takes to ferment in the bottle. And I think mead takes a lot longer. It takes about, I'd say, 2 weeks for homebrew, and then probably a month to maybe 6 months.
So 6 weeks, minutes.
6 weeks with the mead.
At least that's what it was mine.
If you want to use like a Sam Adams bottle, you buy caps, and this is a capper. Again, the same process. You fill it up, pull out, get the gap, and then you put the bottle cap, which I don't have one, and you basically just press this down like that, and it caps it on there. And some of the other important tools are you want to be able to take the temperature of your mead. Again, to make sure when you pitch the yeast, usually it's 75 to 70 degrees. I think I usually do 70 degrees. And this is your hydrometer. And what you want to do is you want to take a reading in the beginning. Before you pitch the yeast, you take a reading. It's called specific gravity or original gravity. And that, I think, measures the sugars in the okay.
Yeah.
And then you take, after it ferments, you take another reading, and then I actually have a little thing, I plug it into it, it tells you percent alcohol.
Use that because then you want to control the alcohol that's in your final product, so you have to control the amount of sugar that goes in. So depending on what specific gravity you start with, you'll get either more or less alcohol. So usually if you have a recipe, it'll tell you you want a specific gravity of 1.1 to start, and that'll give you 10% alcohol, assuming that your yeast can metabolize all that sugar and not die. But yeah, and then the other time you use it is at the end, because then you'll say, okay, when it's done, it should be 1.080. And that way you know the fermentation is done and all the sugar's been converted.
And a lot of the recipes will tell you, they give you that original gravity. If you look at some of these books, it'll tell you what the original gravity should be after you make the batch. I think that's it, right?
What's in the little jars over there?
Oh, this? Okay, so this I actually went yesterday and bought ingredients to make homebrew beer. So this recipe that I have is called Black Cat Halloween Porter. So I'm going to make a porter out of this one. And in these little containers, this is your hops. In beer, basically, your hops are what preserves your beer. They don't pasteurize when you make homebrew. So actually the hops will pasteurize it. So in here is your hops, and that actually gives you a lot of the flavor in your beer is the type of hops that you put in here. And actually at what time you put it in the boil. If you want a bitter beer, then you usually put it in at 60 minutes. And then 15 minutes, I believe, is your aroma. And then what I do a lot, because I make India Pale Ales, is I will do a dry hop. And when I transfer from the primary into the secondary, I just put hops in here, and it's a dry hop, and it really gives that flavor. And this is a malt. This is a grain, and gives character to the beer, and gives it a good head.
Does that dissolve in the once you put it in the bag? Or?
This actually, I put in a grain bag, and what I'll do is as I'm heating the water, I soak this in there, or steep it like a tea bag. Soak it in there, soak it in there, soak it in there for probably half an hour, and then pull it out. Just take this whole thing out. Usually the hops, though, if they're in the wort, they're one of the things that settles to the bottom, so you'll see them on the bottom.
Yeah, you don't want that stuff.
This stuff.
No.
Yeah, no. That's why I use the bag for that. The hops, I don't care.
Yeah.
Irish moss we talked about, and then I think, Bob, you talked about this. When you make mead, you want to put a yeast energizer in there, and because the malt has it, but honey does not have, I guess, the stuff that makes the yeast energizes it.
Sometimes if you don't have enough yeast nutrient in there naturally, what will happen is you'll get what's called a stuck fermentation, which means it'll start to ferment and then it'll just kind of stop.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you can reactivate it by putting some yeast nutrient in there, and that'll get it going again, so it'll ferment all the way and ferment all the sugars. I guess the last comment I would have for all the home brewers, and it took me a good 10 years to learn this about winemaking. I found out that for every 0.5% of alcohol that you decrease in your wine, it really improves the flavor and allows a lot more of the other flavors to come through. So in the beginning, when I was making wine that, you drank a couple of glasses and it was pretty sharp. And what I found out over the years is that if you make it a little bit less alcohol, a lot more of the fruit flavors come through. So my recommendation would be, if you're making mead, I would start on the low end of the alcohol scale to try to get the better flavor and not so much alcohol in there, because the alcohol really will mask some of the more delicate flavors that come out of the honey.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to learn that one.
It's funny because homebrewing now, they're making them higher and higher,
Yeah.
to 8%,
Wow.
whereas it used to be 4.5, something like that. They're making them stronger. Maybe they're trying to get equal with wine.
Wine.
Do you use any honey?
I do, actually. There's a Christmas recipe that I have that calls for honey, so I use that. Yeah, I tried that. Yeah, actually, my mother, that's her favorite beer. So I always make it for her.
What about the honey you start with? Spring honey tastes different than fall honey. A recommendation? Our spring honey from our house tends to be very light and floral,
Like this.
like that one. Even lighter, like you said, mine's very pale this year at least. And my fall honey it's uva honey. It's really dark and almost like molasses. I can imagine that one of them would probably have a more earthier flavor and whatever. You guys, I don't know, Stan, if you've ever tried that and have a preference, which one's better, or?
The darker one has more flavor, more lemon.
Yeah.
Yeah, this Charlie Pappison actually talks about the different honeys and the different flavors. It's basically all in your personal preference.
Yeah. Okay. Any preference on bottles or difficulties? I don't know, I kind of like the wine bottle look versus a beer bottle type thing,
For
right?
mead, yeah.
So for a wine bottle, you can buy a corker that's very similar to the capper that you showed for beer. Does exactly the same thing. You put the cork in and just put the ears down and the dogs are ready for it.
The only comment I'd make, some people take containers. You want to make sure you have food grade containers.
Good point, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even the hoses and things, there's something that, people will get a bucket from Home Depot, think they can do this, and it's not.
That's a good point.
Make sure
That
it's
is a good point, food grade all the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, this was great. It was cool.
You're welcome.
I've been wondering for a long time how to do this, so
Actually, it's funny, it's a lot easier than wine, it's pretty easy to do. Just gotta put the stuff together.
that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know how hard it was. I'm game to try this now.
Well, I can tell you, when you make beer, it's the first day when you're boiling, you have to at least boil it for an hour. And then you gotta do cleanup and all that stuff. Whereas mead, if you just heat it up or whatever,
It seems like a lot less ingredients than meat also.
less ingredients, exactly, yeah.
A lot of stuff you can use and what you have in your house, like lemons and,
Yep.
of course you need a good bucket and stuff, but I mean, gallon jug works just fine.
Right.
For cod,
If you don't want to invest a lot of money, you can
Yeah,
just
you
do
might
it.
try it.
Cool.
If you'd like your meat to be a little more wine-like, you can always put raisins in, either dark raisins or golden raisins. I've used both in making some fruit wines, and it gives it almost a wine-like taste. So I've made dandelion wine using golden raisins, and it comes out almost like a dry white wine. So you can think about that. And there's other fruit you can put in. Roger Garris, who's one of our members, makes what's called Sizer, which is mead with apples and apple juice, and it's very tasty actually.
Yeah.
So you can put just pretty much any fruit you want into it, blueberries, cherries, blackberries.
It would be nice if we had several people that did this, and, sample it, see what it's like. I mean, I've had mine, but I haven't had anybody else's. It'd be kind of fun.
We do that next year from now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So one other question, and again, I've never made mead, so I don't know, but what I was reading is it takes a really long time for it to really kind of blossom into what the best it can be, like 2, 3, 4 years or more. Do you find that to be the case? So you really need to wait. The more you can age it, the better.
Doesn't last that.
Like
Doesn't
wine,
last that long.
Not all wine is that way. You know, a lot of wine after a year or two, that's it. It's not very tannic. It's not going to get any better after that.
I
right?
like it aged, yeah.
But from what I hear about mead is if you can wait that 3 or 4 years, it's well worth it.
It's the anticipation.
Yeah, I don't know if I can wait that long.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Unless you had a lot of it, then you
Has
could.
anyone tried making champagne with mead?
Yeah.
There was one fellow years ago that made champagne, sparkling, I don't know how he did it, but
There's a recipe in that book I have, sparkling mead.
it was really sparkling, but we have to taste it in town. Champagne.
Okay, you're up.
I'm up. You guys want to take a quick break? 5 minutes?
Take a look at some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to come up and just shoot some footage of stuff. Can we take this out? I don't want to break it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's like something they used in the bathtub at one time, right? Making vodka.
Ah. Yeah, just, one of my favorite beers is called Dale's Pale Ale.
Who was in
Yeah,
charge
this is just-
tonight?
Flexible, tubing.
Flexible, yeah,
So I'm
but
gonna give that
like
to you,
Bob was
Bob.
saying,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take care of that. All right.
make sure it's.
So they actually make a food grade copper tubing then?
Yeah,
That's
okay.
why I bought it from the beer
I'm in
shop. So
charge.
to speak.
So this is pre-made, you didn't.
Yeah, it's pre-made, but actually this,
Remind me of one.
This book here?
What happened?
the one with Black Cat,
Hey, Bob.
actually, this one shows you. How they-
No.
Well, Mr. Chairman,